Sex. When rooted in health and nurtured with intention, it becomes a sacred connection, a direct link to creation, source energy, to divine power. But what happens when the link between the spiritual and the physical is disrupted and tainted by generations of violence, trauma, and suppression? What happens when an innate sacred sexual connection is perverted by cycles of pain? Let's break this down just a little further. How does a young Black girl growing into her own energy view her connection to sexuality and the shadow of this history? And how does this shape her sexual and spiritual relationship with herself and womanhood? Well, we're going to get into it. So, grab your tea, okay? Your comfiest blanket, and let's get into some things, okay? Shall we? We shall. Since this is the first time we've officially connected on this platform, hey, how's it going? Allow me to introduce myself and why I am creating this series. My name is Drew Johnson Boise. I am currently in my PhD journey to obtain my degree in integral transpersonal psychology. In basic layman's terms, I'm really interested in the connection of the mind and spirit. As I prepare to enter into my dissertation phase, I am really passionate about exploring trauma, particularly adverse childhood experiences, and how it impacts Black bodies. So I will be pulling resources through my research into my videos and vice versa. Let's work smarter, not harder. Also, allow me to preface, this is an open space for dialogue. As I am exploring these topics, I encourage us all to enter into the chat with respectful, don't get crazy, but meaningful conversation. I do not claim to be an expert, but rather an explorer. So let's get into it. Girls being too fast, hot in the ass, too grown. These are just a few colloquialisms that I personally have heard in my adolescence and youth. When constructing this video essay, it prompted me to pause and reflect on my own relationship with my sexuality. So we're gonna be getting real personal. And with this exploration, I have uncovered that my sexuality and violence are intrinsically linked. From finding my mom's porn tape collection, to looking at porn on cable TV at the ripe age of 6, to being held down by a young boy and being forcibly kissed, to me at age 11, dancing outside to an eccentric CD tape when I noticed an adult neighbor male watching me. Later, his lived-in girlfriend confronted and threatened to beat me up because her grown partner was watching me. To me later in my teenage years shamelessly dropping neck in alleyways, to the eventual sexual assault in my college years. Sex and violence went hand in hand in my personal journey, but it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just a single occurrence. As a matter of fact, it happened so frequently in my neighborhood that it was normalized. My childhood friends, we would laugh when we shared stories of close encounters of kidnapping. Okay? We gawked and gossiped at the neighborhood girl who slept with the apartment maintenance man, who was 20 years, she was like 14. Or the 14-year-old girl who was found in the home of a 40-year-old man. We all gathered around as her parents found her and walked her outside in front of all of the onlooking neighborhood kids. Looking back, that time is wild. Sex was normalized in all its different perversions, with and without adult supervision. I recall being a pregnant pimp as my Halloween costume, and my 2 friends were my hoes. I was in middle school. The neighborhood adults found it so hilarious that I won my apartment costume contest. Where were the more adultier adults at? To quote one of my favorite video essay baddies, T Noir, Sexuality isn't something you choose and then explore as a woman. Sexuality is something that chooses you as a woman. But let's take it a step further. Sexuality is something thrusted upon you in girlhood, especially in Black bodies, at least for me in my case, and I know for others. Working through this video made me realize just how the roots of sexualization and violence had taken hold in my life. Those roots were a constant reminder to me that as a Black girl, my sexuality was always up for discussion, was always up for display, and was always up for grabs. As I shed light on my own relationship with sexuality, I think back to the stories of women that came before me. That these stories are not solely my own, but they mirror the stories of my mother and my grandmother and the woman before them. Sexual traumatization had rippled from a microscopic level from my tiny community to a societal level. But how long has this reverberation of sexual violence been plaguing Black cis female bodies? Where can we begin to find the links that our Black bodies were not of our own in essence, but are up for public scrutiny, debate, for pleasure and pain, whether consensually or not? Before we get into it, real quick, let's just set the scene to understand the scope of view. We will be exploring the interconnection of sex, trauma, and Black female bodies through the scope of transpersonal psychology, trauma, specifically adverse childhood experiences, and generational trauma, looking through research and lived experiences. So I'll be sharing some of my narrative. But before we hop in, I would be remiss to not to mention my biases and my limitations. I want to make mention that the scope of view that I'm responding from in some shape or form has been impacted by colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. So let's extend grace. And within this exploration, my intention is to explore, just like you all, and glean a deeper insight as we delve into these connections. So please extend grace. Feel free for correction in the comment section and healthy dialogue. I'm open for it. So let's talk trauma, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and generational trauma. They are deeply interconnected, as both reflect a cycle or a cyclical nature of unresolved pain and its profound impact on individuals and families. We can think of generational trauma as a family heirloom, something passed down through generations, like a piece of jewelry. ACEs represents the moment that heirloom is bestowed upon a child in their earliest years. So great grandma passed down her ring to you at age 2, baby, now you got it. Trauma is a subjective, psychological, emotional, and physical response to deeply distressing events that overwhelm a person's ability to cope. ACEs, which can include abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, or parental loss, often occurs from infancy to age 18, laying a foundation of long-lasting effects on emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual development. These negative experiences are not confined to one demographic, occurring across various economic levels, but they disproportionately impact marginalized communities, including minorities and LGBTQ+ individuals, exacerbating systematic inequalities. In transpersonal scope, trauma, whether stemming from ACEs or inherited from past generations, it can be viewed as stored emotional energy within the body, affecting the mind, body, and spirit. Before we go any further, let me pause and clarify what I mean by spirit. I'm not referring to a specific religious affiliation, but rather the human spirit, the life force energy that lives within our human bodies. With intervention, trauma's impact reverberates through generations, perpetuating cycles of pain and limiting the potential for healing and growth. Without intervention, can we all think about a single traumatizing event that has impacted American Black culture for generations? If you guessed slavery, then you're absolutely right on the money. You're correct. Ding, ding, ding. The sexualization of Black women has long been wielded as a tool of systematic oppression, intertwining race, gender, sexuality to dehumanize and control. This oppression reflects a historical and deliberate strategy perpetuated to maintain power structures. Black female bodies have uniquely borne the weight of being both hypersexualized and dehumanized, creating a legacy of trauma that is alive and well today. These dynamics were not incidental, but rooted prior to the era of enslavement, where European travelers found scantily clad natives. This semi-nudity was misrepresented as lewdness, according to the James Crow Museum. During the enslavement era, the JEZEBEL archetype emerged, branding women as inherently promiscuous and sexually available. This harmful stereotype to rationalize the horrific acts of sexual violence committed against them, framing victimization as a natural consequence of their supposed hypersexuality. But the idea of innate hypersexuality within Black female bodies was born from somewhere. But where? To quote a few excerpts from the book Black Sexual Politics by Patricia Hill Collins, Europeans work within a great chain of being, linking Africans and animals through a series of overlapping constructs, viewing a family resemblance between African people and animals. Claiming the kinship between animals and Africans explained their intrinsic and bodily impulses, and attempted to humanize and dehumanize Black people.
Move up. Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University were saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being.
Within this construct of dehumanization, it sets the precedence for violence and sexual exploitations of Black bodies to exist and deeply rooted itself in lineages and generations. Within the white American slave home, all white men within a slave-owning family could treat enslaved African women within their families as sexual properties. Kahn continues, the myth that it is impossible to sexually assault Black women because they were already promiscuous helped mask the sexual exploitation of enslaved Black women by their owners. In an interview with Dr. Crystal Femster, she posits, in certain states, the sexual assault of enslaved women were not considered a crime, so it's very rare to have a Black woman testify to sexual assault. Enslaved Black women were systematically exploited, subjected to rape and forced reproduction to increase the enslaved population, treating their bodies as commodities in slave markets. Black women were encouraged to have as many children. Under slavery, having many children enhanced slave owners' wealth, and a good breeder woman was less likely to be sold. After the emancipation period, the Jezebel trope persisted, reinforced by media, literature, material culture that continued to hypersexualize Black female bodies, not just Black women, but Black children. Victims of sexual violence were often blamed for their own abuse, perpetuating a cycle of shame and silence. In response to these stereotypes, women adopted a conservative behavior to counter harmful narratives. Simultaneously, false accusations of promiscuity and violence were weaponized to justify atrocities like lynching, tying sexuality to broader social violence inflicted on Black communities. Amid the fight for equality, Black feminist movements worked to dismantle these harmful stereotypes. Through literature, art, and activism, Black women reclaimed their narratives, challenging the reduction of their identities to hypersexual creatures. However, the media continued to perpetuate exploitation, portraying Black women in music and film as hypersexual figures or fetishized as exotic others. These depictions not only misrepresented Black womanhood, but also reinforced a legacy of systematic dehumanization. Can you think about your own family lineage and seeing any trends related to the presence of trauma and sexuality? I know for some people that might be such a taboo question to posit, but it's true. I recall going to school with a young woman who was sexually assaulted, and she came back to school and she said that it was a family tradition. It happened to my grandmother, it happened to my mom, and it happened to me. It was so normalized that she saw it as a tradition. Now, I'm sure that was a way to cope with the trauma that she just experienced, the violence that she just experienced. But is there any connection within your own personal life or with your family's life? Something to think about. For my family, the threat of sexual violence has always been present in my mother's life, nearly reaching a peak through an experience of sexual assault and sexual promiscuity, finding self-worth in her ability to capture the attention of men in adolescence. That was inherently passed down to me in both covert and overt means. Through the presence of sexual explicit material, to access to porn on cable TV, to neighborhood men watching us, little black children play with his penis hanging outside of his pants, to sexual exploitation thrusted upon me through curious neighborhood children. As I grew older in my adolescence, my self-worth had begun to dwindle, and I found my only worth was inherently linked to my sexual availability. I found myself being sexualized as a prepubescent simply for wearing a halter top, walking past a construction site on my way to the store. Girl, being chased down the street by men to hide in a local gas station bathroom, walking through the adjacent apartment complexes, and being catcalled by grown men who were more than okay with getting a 14-year-old teenage girl's number. All of these experiences, and listen, many more before I reached age 16. I had internalized the ideology that had been long set before me. I hypersexualized myself in a distorted attempt to gain a sense of belonging, identity, and self-worth. I found myself losing my virginity at age 15, hanging around groups of local girls that participated in lap dances for fun and prostitution. Although my sexual journey, never led me down the road to outright prostitution, I began to wonder. And I wonder what the difference was between me trading my body for a means of belonging or semblance of love that I was missing, and how was that any different for someone exchanging their access to their body for monetary goods? My identity was intrinsically linked to my sexuality. It was my worth. I had found myself being another one of those fast-ass girls. So how do we make sense of the intersection between adverse childhood experiences, generational trauma, and how might this relationship show up in the present day? Is it really that deep? The slave indoctrination of Black female bodies is alive and well. It's everywhere we look. But let's keep it a buck. Let's keep it real honest. How is ACEs truly impacting the psychology of adult women and children and how they interact with their own sexuality? According to the National Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. ACEs impacts every ethnicity and nationality. But for the sake of our time together, we'll be focusing on Black female bodies. In this present day, we see sex almost on a daily basis in the Black community. It's normalized. It's not taboo. In the music we listen to, the media we watch, the interactions of our community members, either praising sexual liberation or condemning it. In popular Black culture, we see figureheads of the likes of Megan Thee Stallion, Sexy Red, Sukihana, Ice Spice, and other rap girlies who are claiming to use their sexuality as a means of liberation. But is it really? Is the way we are interacting with this sexuality a cause of celebration, concern, or neither? For a moment, let's just take an objective step back outside of ourselves and just observe and try to understand what it is that we are actually viewing, instead of judging whether for or against. I want to set this section up with the following quote from the book Adverse Childhood Experiences by Kathleen Brewer Smith. Lack of regard for self and others may be a reoccurring theme for some survivors of adverse childhood experiences. Those who had been sexually abused had more gynecological problems, such as sexually transmitted diseases from the abuser or subsequent multiple partners. Some describe sexual addiction and/or having learned behaviors of using sex as a means to control men. We have heard and seen this before.
You would just use what you got to get what you want and stop messing with this chump change. And what's that?
In context of sexualization trauma, That quote in itself is a traumatic program response. But what is truly lurking underneath the masquerade of sexual liberation that we see? Is there a thin line between hypersexuality and sexual liberation? I think to best understand, we should unpack and define these terms real quick. Hypersexuality is a medical condition that involves uncontrollable sexual urges or behaviors that cause distress or impairment in a person's life, according to Mayo Clinic. Some symptoms may look like people with hypersexuality experiences intense and frequent sexual urges, unprotected sex or risky sexual behavior, strong emotions linked to shame, remorse, or depression, distress in their personal, work, or school life, harm to their relationship, finances, and other aspects of their life. Hypersexuality can have various causing, including, say it with me, past trauma. Sexual liberation, on the other hand, is the idea that people should be free to express their sexuality without shame, judgment, or discrimination. It's the movement that challenges societal norms and promotes the idea that sexual expression is a natural and healthy part of life. I would love to just sit and unpack that for 2 seconds. What if the express of this hypersexualization, ass out, twerking, thong showing, titties out, whoa. What if that is, in fact, an act of sexual liberation and hypersexuality? What if this display of sexual liberation is just being completely honest without any filter that this form of sexual expression has its links to trauma, and this is how we're expressing it? I think for me, the distinction between whether hypersexuality or sexual liberation being termed positive or negative is how you feel, how it leaves you feeling. Hypersexuality for me, as someone who has personally experienced it, it left me feeling, like I said, empty. I was using external factors to fill an internal void. It left me feeling disgusting. It left me feeling terrible. Now that I'm in a more healthy space, my sexualization, it fills me. I feel empowered. I feel, baby, I ain't got 2 kids for no reason now, okay? I'm outside with my husband. But it leaves me feeling empowered, divine, connected. So I think for me, my personal standards, it's about how I feel, not necessarily how someone tells me I should show up or how society deems I should show up. My mind immediately goes back to Sexy Red. She has been bestowed with many names, and it doesn't seem that Child of God is one of them. The self-proclaimed raw dog queen has sexualized herself and seems absolutely unapologetic about it. But I pause to wonder what truly is at the root of her sexual exclamation. I mean, a young lady with lip gloss with the names of Yellow Discharge and Gonorrhea. That is an interesting marketing ploy. Or is it telling of something a little deeper? I want to bring light to her interview she did with Lil Yachty a year ago.
Tell us like the craziest thing that's ever happened to you.
Crazy shit. That's gonna stay between us.
I got raped before. That's the craziest thing that ever happened to me.
Maybe something a little under that. Maybe something. Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Up about her sexual assault. We cannot speculate that she received healing for that trauma and that traumatic time in her life. But if she did not, and allow that time to fester within her mind, body, and spirit, then it makes absolute perfect sense to the persona she exhibits today. But please keep in mind, multiple things can be true at once. She can be sexually liberated while also experiencing hypersexualization. Multiple things can exist at once. Of the likes of Krishan Rock, the admission of sexual assault and violence in her childhood, and how it might be a direct link to how she's showing up in her life today. all these people with their experiences and how it manifests into their present reality. It lends me to pause and wonder, what are we truly looking at and what are we judging? We're judging we're judging the ideology that was set before us, and then us living and existing in said ideology and culture. I too have experienced the culmination of my sexual trauma play out in my childhood years as it manifested in my self-proclaimed hoe phase. I was thinking I was out here playing these hoes and getting what I wanted. But in reality, I was using external things to fulfill the emptiness that I felt. With each body, I felt myself falling deeper and deeper into a hole of sadness, self-hate, and loneliness. My personal thoughts about the sexual liberation movement is, go off, sis, okay? But be honest with yourself. If your sexuality is tethered to trauma and feelings of self-loathing, then one, you are held and seen. And maybe, just maybe, your sexual expression might be best unpacked in supported health groups. But if your sexual expression brings you true joy, internal happiness, and empowering freedom, then I support you over here, girl. Mm-hmm. As we reach the conclusion of this video essay, I really hope that our time together has brought some light understanding of what we're presently seeing in our society and how it's interconnected to traumas and violence of the past. But I also want to tie in the transpersonal aspect of this conversation because I'm all things spiritual up in here. I don't know if you can tell. I'm trying to act normal for a little bit. And not to say it's abnormal, but this is who I am. My spirituality is what literally brought me from the trenches of the sadness and the heaviness of my stored emotional energy and my trauma into a place of high vibrational living, peace in the journey that I'm on currently. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about it. And again, I do not align with any religious affiliation. My spirituality is very open and free flowing. So, in the context of transpersonal ideology and spiritual rooted dogma, sexual violence and abuse is not only a crime against our physical and mental bodies, but as well as our spiritual bodies. Sex has been intrinsically linked to divine connection of source. No matter your spiritual beliefs or religious affiliations, our female bodies are literally portals that bring souls, other humans, okay? And the perversion of such divine expression of love and divinity robs us of the feeling of just that, our divinity. Hypersexuality threatens our holistic mind, body, spirit system. The trauma impacts the mind, but the lingering energies from the bodies we encounter, beyond the physical risk of STDs and STIs, what about that? The long-term effects of sexual trauma reach deep into the core of our being, while simultaneously stretching across generations. It's vast, it's expansive. Before I go, I want to just leave a few questions for thought. Feel free to respond in the comment section or just answer it in your mind. Okay. What would our world look like if instead of criticizing and judging Black women for their sexual expression, what if we sat back and sought to understand? What if we celebrated expression of healthy sexual liberation, and whatever that means? What if we taught healthy sexual connection to young Black girls instead of sexualizing them? What if we discussed the links of trauma and connection to sex and violence that currently thrive in our communities, media, and entertainment? How would our culture radically change? I truly hope this video has left food for thought. I feel good with what I've shared with you all today. I could go further, but I'm not. I want to take a step back and just allow room for growth to happen. Maybe in the future, we can revisit this conversation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please remember, this is a safe space and we should be respectful for each other's journeys. If you're looking for more content like this, then feel free to follow my channel. Check out my links and my bios. I do offer personal coaching as well as materials, books, packets, online courses, workshops, all of that, but as well as just content. Until we meet again, until next time, bye.